You are standing on a grated metal floor, feeling a deep, rhythmic vibration traveling up through your boots. The air around you is thick, carrying the sharp scent of sulfur and hot dust. 30 feet away, a river of liquid iron flows at 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit, radiating a wall of heat that presses against your face even through a specialized visor. This is not a temporary fire. The blast furnace looming above you has not been allowed to cool down for 18 continuous years. To let it go cold would cost millions of dollars in catastrophic structural damage, effectively destroying the internal architecture of the unit. How does a small crew of operators, working rotating 12-hour shifts, manage to keep this massive, volatile chemical reaction perfectly balanced for nearly 2 decades? That is exactly what we are going to find out today. My name is Ray, and this is Industrial Enigma. This is the channel where we go inside the places that build the modern world and meet the people who keep them running. We are not looking at a foundry today, or an electric melting unit. We are looking exclusively at the traditional integrated iron-making process. Let us start with the numbers, because the numbers are what make this strange. We are talking about a structure that routinely reaches over 200 feet into the air, holding thousands of tons of raw material at any given moment. A modern blast furnace produces anywhere from 3,000 to over 10,000 tons of liquid iron every single day. Economically, the stakes are staggering. The cost to build one of these units runs into the hundreds of millions, sometimes crossing the billion-dollar mark for the largest global installations. But the temporal scale is what truly sets this operation apart. Once the initial fire is lit, the campaign life of the lining is designed to last 15 to 20 years. During that time, the internal temperature must never drop below a critical threshold. If the heat fails, the molten metal and slag inside will solidify into a massive, immovable block of iron, essentially destroying the vessel from the inside out. Gary Works, the massive United States steel plant located on the southern shore of Lake Michigan, operates several of these iron-making giants simultaneously to ensure continuous production. The operators who run these systems work continuously, moving through morning, evening, and night shifts to ensure the burden of iron ore, coke, and limestone never stops feeding into the top. To understand the human element, you have to look at the regulations. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the federal agency that sets workplace safety limits in the United States, mandates specific heat stress protocols for these environments. The air on the cast house floor, where the workers actually interface with the liquid metal, easily reaches 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer months. Workers are hydrating, cycling out for cooling breaks, and monitoring each other for signs of fatigue. The basic oxygen steelmaking process, the secondary metallurgical process that refines the raw liquid iron into workable steel, relies entirely on this continuous flow of hot metal. The blast furnace feeds molten iron to the basic oxygen steelmaking process, which requires precise chemical compositions to function correctly. If the iron-making stops, the steel-making stops. This relentless interdependency is why an 18-year continuous run is not just a point of pride, but a strict economic necessity. The numbers demand perfection. Every ton of raw material that travels up the skip car must be precisely weighed and analyzed. The chemical balance inside the vessel is constantly shifting, reacting to the ambient humidity in the air outside and the slight variations in the mined ore. The men and women in the control room monitor hundreds of sensors, making minute adjustments to the hot blast temperature to keep the reaction stable. They are steering a chemical reaction the size of a skyscraper, and they have been doing it without hitting the brakes since the early 2000s. To understand how this operation works, we have to walk through the physical architecture of the facility, starting from the ground up. You begin at the cast house, the reinforced platform that surrounds the base of the blast furnace. This is the domain of the furnace keepers. When you stand on this floor, you are standing on thick refractory brick, designed to handle the inevitable splashes of liquid iron. The air here vibrates with the roar of the hot blast, the highly pressurized, superheated air that is continuously injected into the bottom of the vessel through copper nozzles known as tuyères. Here is the part most people outside the industry never see. The iron does not just pour out of an open spout. It is held back by a plug of specialized clay inside the tap hole, the primary exit point at the base of the hearth. Every few hours, the crew uses a heavy pneumatic drill to bore through that clay plug. When the drill breaks through, the pressure releases, and a blinding stream of liquid pig iron surges out, flowing down a precisely angled trough lined with refractory materials. The heat radiating off that trough is absolute. If you are standing 10 feet away, your fire-retardant jacket absorbs the thermal energy instantly, and you instinctively have to turn your face away from the glare. The tap hole releases liquid iron into the torpedo car, which transports the metal across the facility on heavy-duty rail lines. These massive, thermos-like rail cars sit below the cast house floor, catching the liquid metal and keeping it hot for its journey to the next stage. Once the cast is complete, the crew must immediately reseal the vessel. The mud gun seals the tap hole with specialized clay, which stops the flow of metal until the next casting cycle begins. It is a massive hydraulic arm that swings into place, pressing thousands of pounds of pressure against the opening to force the clay deep into the hole. Above all of this, rising hundreds of feet into the air, is the steel shell of the furnace itself. The refractory lining protects the steel shell of the blast furnace, which would otherwise melt within hours of exposure to the internal heat. It is a highly engineered stack of carbon and ceramic bricks, carefully monitored by thermal sensors. At the very top, the burden, the calculated mix of iron ore, coke, and limestone, is continuously dropped inside via the skip car. The raw materials fall into the inferno, slowly descending over several hours, melting and reacting until they become the liquid iron flowing out at your feet. Every piece of this architecture is built for continuous, brutal endurance. The most counterintuitive aspect of this environment is just how quiet and deeply analytical the control room is compared to the violence of the cast house floor. You might expect an ancient, soot-covered operation relying entirely on brute force, but the modern iron-making process is a masterclass in thermal science and data management. Braddock, Pennsylvania, a historic borough just east of Pittsburgh along the Monongahela River, hosts one of the oldest continuously operating iron facilities in the country. Yet, if you walk into the pulpit where the operators sit, it looks like an air traffic control center. The operators are not judging the temperature by eye anymore. They are analyzing real-time gas composition arrays, acoustic sensors that listen to the descent of the burden, and laser profiling systems that map the exact wear on the refractory lining deep inside the vessel. They can see a thermal pocket forming hours before it becomes a physical problem on the floor. And honestly, that detail is more interesting than it has any right to be. The brute force of the heavy machinery outside is completely governed by the silent, glowing screens inside. They are balancing the carbon chemistry and thermodynamics with such precision that they can predict the exact silicon content of a batch of iron before it ever leaves the tap hole. The veteran operators in these chairs might have calluses on their hands from their early years on the floor, but today they are essentially performing high-level industrial chemistry. Now let us look at the small things that turn a plant into a place people spend their lives in. First, there are the hard hat stickers. A worker's helmet is their industrial resume, completely covered in faded, heat-warped decals that tell you exactly which campaigns they have worked, which safety milestones they survived, and which local union chapter they belong to. You can read a 30-year career just by looking at the back of a person's head while they wait for the shift meeting to start. Second, is the highly specific real estate of the locker room doors. Open any heavy steel locker, and taped to the inside door is a collage of what matters outside the gates. School portraits of children from 10 years ago, faded postcards and hunting trip photos, all protected from the pervasive industrial dust by layers of clear packing tape. It is a small square of personal identity in a place that otherwise requires absolute uniformity. Third, is the tradition of the shift change handover. It is never just a passing nod. 10 minutes before the hour, the incoming keeper stands next to the outgoing keeper by the trough. They do not look at each other. They both stand shoulder to shoulder, staring at the flow of the molten iron, talking out of the sides of their mouths about how the clay is behaving today, or which hydraulic valve is sticking. The information passed in those quiet 5 minutes is more vital than anything written in the official logs. Fourth, you have the dedicated coffee station in the break room, which operates under its own unwritten jurisdiction. Everyone has their specific mug, usually stained brown and never thoroughly washed, just rinsed. If a new hire touches a veteran's mug, they will hear about it before they even reach the water cooler. That coffee pot brews the thickest, most aggressive dark roast you can imagine, essential for the 3 in the morning slump. Fifth, there is the thermal scarring on the heavy silver coats. The veteran workers wear their silver reflective jackets like armor, and you can always spot the senior guys by the unique splatter patterns of tiny burn marks near the lower hems, places where microscopic drops of slag bounced off the sand. They are badges of time spent close to the heat. Sixth, is the ritual of leaving the boots at work. Nobody takes their work boots home. They are left in the dry room, coated in fine metallic dust that you never want tracked into your living room carpet. The act of lacing up those specific, heavy metatarsal guard boots is the psychological trigger that you are officially on the clock. Seventh, is the final walk of a retiring operator. On their last day, after 30 years of feeding the furnace, the entire crew lines the walkway to the parking lot. There is no loud cheering, just solid handshakes, a few heavy pats on the back, and the quiet respect of a team acknowledging someone who put in their time and walked out whole. Now, this would not be an industrial enigma video if we were not completely straight with you about both sides. The reality of keeping a blast furnace operational for 18 years means humans are subjected to an environment that actively resists human life. The sheer physical toll of the heat, the constant vibration, and the omnipresent fine particulate dust wears down even the most resilient crews. Shift work is inherently abrasive to the human body. Rotating between days and nights disrupts circadian rhythms, strains family dynamics, and leads to chronic fatigue that operators just have to manage as part of the job description. Any veteran on that floor will tell you the same thing. The body keeps a very accurate score of every hour spent on the concrete. Safety is always the priority, but the inherent risk of moving thousands of tons of liquid fire cannot be engineered down to zero. The Personal Protective Equipment Standard, the regulatory framework that dictates exactly what gear a worker must wear near molten metal, governs every piece of clothing on the cast house floor. The heavy silver coats, the face shields, the Kevlar gloves, they all add weight and retain body heat, making an already exhausting physical task even more draining. There is also the reality of noise. The constant roar of the pressurized air and the heavy machinery requires strict adherence to hearing conservation programs. Yet the legacy of older days means many veterans still struggle with long-term hearing loss. Furthermore, the industry itself is facing significant headwinds. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the principal federal agency that measures labor market activity and working conditions, tracks employment trends in primary metal manufacturing, and the data shows a steady decline in total jobs over the last 2 decades. The workforce is aging rapidly. The average age on a cast house floor often skews into the late 40s and 50s, creating a massive knowledge gap as these highly experienced operators approach retirement. When a keeper with 30 years of experience walks out the door, they take an intuitive understanding of the thermal behavior that no manual can adequately capture. However, it is important to recognize what the sector is actively doing to mitigate these realities. The modern heavy industry relies far more on remote robotics for the most dangerous tasks. Mud guns and drills are operated from environmentally controlled cabins rather than manual levers right next to the trough. The focus on ergonomic interventions and serious fatigue management is better today than it has ever been in the history of ironmaking. It is still a punishing environment, but it is one that is slowly learning to protect the people who make it function. Looking ahead, the future of the blast furnace is standing at a complex crossroads. The global push for decarbonization is forcing the primary metals industry to completely rethink how it extracts iron from ore. Traditional ironmaking relies heavily on metallurgical coal, which acts as both a fuel and a chemical reducing agent, but it also generates significant carbon emissions. Because of this, many companies are aggressively investing in electric arc furnace technology and direct reduced iron processes, which use natural gas or hydrogen to strip the oxygen from the ore without melting it first in a traditional hearth. This transition is slow, but it is inevitable. The direct reduced iron process, a newer commercial method that avoids liquid smelting entirely, is rapidly gaining ground as a cleaner alternative. As these newer technologies come online, the massive, towering structures we see today may slowly be phased out in favor of modular, electrically driven plants. Alongside the environmental shift, automation is fundamentally changing the headcount required to run a facility. Advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms can now predict thermal dynamics better than human intuition, reducing the need for manual intervention on the floor. While this means fewer operators will be exposed to the extreme heat, it also means the total number of jobs is shrinking. The jobs that remain, however, require a much higher level of technical sophistication. Because skilled labor is becoming increasingly scarce, the plants that survive are being forced to dramatically improve the quality of life and working conditions for their crews, simply to attract and retain the talent needed to keep the fires burning. We have walked across the vibrating cast house floor, felt the intense thermal radiation of liquid pig iron, and seen the quiet, data-driven precision of the control room that keeps this massive operation running. We explored the deeply ingrained rituals of the crew and faced the honest reality of the physical toll this environment demands. Today, the technology keeping a worker safe is light years ahead of what it was a generation ago. Yet, the essential, grueling nature of standing next to a river of liquid fire remains as demanding as it has always been. Keeping a blast furnace lit for 18 consecutive years is a monumental testament to human endurance and industrial discipline. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to Industrial Enigma for more like it. And if you have ever worked a shift inside a plant like this, or if someone in your family did, drop it in the comments below. I would genuinely like to hear it. Thanks for watching.